have a segment for you with Federico Gonzalez Waite, who used to work for the Mexican government and was part of the movement and process of the government starting to not just endorsing open source, but also adding open source to their policies to encourage government agencies as well as the corporate segment, education, and academia to rely more on open source software where it was possible and available. And Federico talks about the challenge of mindset change in a large organization. And when it comes to the government, it's even harder because in many cases, governments have a process to evaluate and purchase software and software licenses. So, most people in government agencies are usually used to working with vendors and third parties. Now, when you get the directive that you should be relying on open source software and take control over your infrastructure and processes based on open source software, that means that there is no vendor company to call anymore. And Federico shares his experience within the Mexican government, how they went through the process of taking control over their software infrastructure and tools. So when it comes to people participating in communities, um, like language barrier is obviously one of the challenges. Was there anything else, if you have experience with that, like when again the policies came out and the government agency started to use open source, and then it just made sense to also invest and work upstream in some of the communities, like were there any other challenges for people to be able to start doing that?
I think the biggest challenge, apart from everything, was the mindset of the technical teams. Um, like you have to think that these people had been working for years by delegating all the responsibility to a third party. But when you actually change the context and say like, hey, now you need to learn, and now you're responsible for it, I think that was one of the big hurdles that we had because it was just like a complete culture shock. And and we started discovering there was not only that people maybe were not interested in having the responsibility, but then there was also an issue of them not having the capacity to take on that responsibility. So of course, like this is something that happened a lot more within each one of the agencies that I was in. Like as a whole government, it was very difficult to get to those people because it's like to get that scope and on how it's going. But then we actually have to do a lot of work in like retraining people to be able to use these technologies, no? And changing that mindset of I pick up the phone and I ask the service provider or the vendor to do the things into the okay, the phone rang, I am taking this call, I need to fix it. No? So that was a very big change of mindset of the agencies that I was in, and it was very hard to get them to change that culture. And so that I think is one of the big challenges. So whoever is doing an open project, this is one of the things that you need to be aware of, that you actually need to have those kind of things. Especially, I think the biggest challenge was when we were talking about open infrastructure, and and when you actually had engineers that were trained in Oracle, you had to make sure that they knew how now to use Postgres, and then you need to make sure that they could use some cloud technology, and then you had to make sure that they could also OpenStack and all these kind of different technologies. So it was a lot of retraining the people that wanted to be retrained, and I think that was something that was critical because you could spend days, months, or years training somebody that doesn't want to learn, and that person is not going to work in this new ideology. So you better get rid of them and get somebody new. But getting those people that actually wanted to be trained, that was pivotal for a lot of the projects. And surprisingly enough, or from our experience, a lot of the times the people that were like these senior staff members, they were the ones that didn't want to learn new tricks. And it was we did a lot of scholarship programs. So a lot of these scholarship people were the ones that actually would say like, "Hey, I have no idea what you're talking about, but if you teach me, I will be the one that takes care of that process. I will be the one that does that." So getting those people that wanted to learn was pivotal for everything. And that's something to keep in mind when you're doing the projects, because another thing that I saw constantly is that we would try to do open source projects with the same people that were doing the licensed projects, and the ideology didn't match, and that's why it was very hard to push them forward. But when they were actually like fine tuning in those teams, and maybe like a couple of people were changed and people with new ideas came in, that's when everything was a complete success.
Kind of resembles another conversation we had on the podcast where I think it was with Wayne Starr. He works for Defense Unicorns, which is an agency that is contracted by the U.S. government. And he was saying something kind of similar, that if you run into an obstacle and you can't convince somebody else, then find a way around. And it sounds like that you're kind of saying the same thing, that there are people who are just set on something, and that is okay, but there is a way to reshuffle teams a little bit and make sure that you have those who have the open mindset of learning and moving forward and exploring a new area. So people needed to build knowledge and also be open minded to build the infrastructure and tools and processes themselves. And there were people who adopted to this very well, and some others didn't really react well to this challenge of mindset and cultural change. And this is where academia, mentorships, internships come into the picture. Because when it comes to hiring new people, if you look around the next generation of developers, engineers, leaders, then they are the people who are open and very eager to learn something new.